there's no antagonistic quality to either of them. There's a sadness at times, there's a sexiness. How did you want to figure them into the story and really keep them grounded as characters as opposed to plot devices?
I mean, I think one of the first things that Will and I talked about when we met was the idea of this very unique antagonist who's actually an upright guy and, you know, wants the best for everyone and really wants to make a family. If he has like a fatal flaw, it's that he doesn't. He sort of knows everyone's secret, but he's just so single-minded in what it is he wants to do. And it was really important to us, I think, that he had a dignity about him. You know, that he wasn't like behind the story all the time. I think if everyone has a secret in this film, then Lee's secret is that he knows everybody's secret, but he chooses not to act on it. And I thought that was a very unique antagonist. And the thing about Sandra that was so striking, and I feel like it's demonstrated so dramatized so great in the screenplay, is the idea that she's a woman who lives on her own. You know, and that's a very, you know, Muriel's sort of like all of her relationships are everything's in reaction to Ben, to Lee, to Julius, and then she meets this woman who lives down the road who lives without a man. And I thought, you know, when we met, you know, I was like, okay, I believe this, you know, I believe this, and they had this really intense dynamic together. So, yeah. That's kind of how we worked on those characters, or at least how we, you know, proceeded.
Sasha, you mentioned the very strong connection you very quickly felt to this character. What about her did you connect to, and what were you excited to play with her?
Well, she's a gay woman, you know, and I love that about her. I think she's super strong. I find that she's fearless in a time that is scary, which I admire her, to be very frank with you. I you know, watching that scene, side note, going another way, watching that scene with Daisy and Kat, when they're in the bar, I was just sitting there and I was like, oh my God. Like my heart was just, you know, and so I think Sandra, I really just admire her so much for being so bold and so proud and so loving and forgiving all at once. I love those qualities about her.
Yeah. I find that in this film, you have this kind of tapestry of queerness, and she really opens the movie up in a lot of ways because she does have this boldness, and our lead characters are obviously relatively, you know, closeted, struggling with that. And to see her so bold, there's a real energy that you come in. I wonder if you could talk about just finding that energy in the movie.
Yeah. I mean, Dan was really lovely. I think working with Dan throughout this, he had a vision, and I think we both loved the character so deeply, and I felt her, you know, I felt her confidence, I felt the way she walked into a room. When I read the script, I really felt like I knew her entirely. And that was a really beautiful thing. That is rare, I think. Sometimes when you're reading all these scripts, you're like, I really hope I understand this one. And I did. I mean, I read it and I just got her.
Well, how much did you get Lee when you first read the script?
It's really interesting. I was just latching onto a word you used, which is tapestry, which I think is such a great descriptor for this film, because there are so many kind of intertwining and often overlapping, you know, narrative strands and experiences and perspectives, and what Bryce and I think Dan captured so brilliantly is the kind of textured nature of life, right? That it's not so singular and easily digestible. And you know, what was really interesting was to think about how Lee was somewhat separate from that, and as Dan touched upon, also kind of aware of that tapestry. And as you know put so brilliantly, if he has a secret, it's that he's maybe a little bit more aware than he's ever going to kind of actually sort of publicly acknowledge. And I think he is aware just by proxy to his brother being queer of his privilege to an extent. But still, you know, that scene that we have together in the house, you see how, you know, in his straight male privilege, straight male white privilege, he doesn't, you see his limitations. You see that he's still, you know, a product of the time. And, you know, Muriel has this wonderful curiosity, and I think she has kind of like wider and broader sort of parameters to her as a person, to her worldview, and at a certain point she kind of outgrows him, you know. So we spoke about all of that, and as I say, I feel like he's just had kind of space in the context of all that rich, beautiful tapestry that is this film.
I'm curious how you felt that Lee saw Muriel over the course of the movie, how that evolved. There's deep love there, and it gets a lot more painful as the story progresses. How did you play that?
It's interesting. I think that a lot of the things that Lee loves and admires about Muriel are things that he also knows he isn't capable of sort of, he knows he's not capable of kind of meeting her in the middle. He sort of admires her adventurousness, her curiosity, while simultaneously he's kind of asking her to fit within his plans and live a life that he knows won't ultimately satisfy those things in her that he admires. So it's true of life, right? It's complex. And he doesn't, frankly, have the kind of tools or the wherewithal to give her ultimately what she finds with you, and what also, you know, Julius unlocks in her, I think, to a degree. So that was just interesting, and again, there's nothing really that you can take at like face value or you know, just for what it appears to be on the surface level with this film, which I love. You know, it's highly dynamic and textured, and as an actor, that's what you love to do, right? Like, I never felt like we did a scene as an ensemble, and it was like, oh yeah, there's a A to B here, and you know, we'll just kind of knock it out. It was always informed by such amazing discussions, and that's the other thing I would say. There was a forward rehearsal time, and you know, you stipulated that we had these wonderful, lengthy, in-depth discussions around the table about every single aspect of our characters and their dynamic and relationship to each other, and that was just so amazing. It was like it resembled more how I kind of assume plays and theatres to sort of go down, and it was great. I love that.
I have to add to that just to make Dan feel wonderful. But I also just loved that so much. My character was informed by a playlist and so much music and photos of a book that I ended up buying and I have in my home and I constantly look at, and articles and videos that have informed me as a queer woman. You know, like it really opened up my life as well, having all these conversations with you, and I really thank you for that.
We also made them all dance and practice dancing. Yeah. So they got to make fools of themselves in front of each other, which I think kind of bonded them. There was a dancing day where we had a choreographer come in and teach everybody.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
It was a great time.
Some people made fools of themselves more than others, but it was fun.
I think you feel all those details you're talking about in the performances and the texture of the movie. So, Daniel, with all that in mind, especially knowing that you are working in a period, and you mentioned earlier kind of wanting to avoid those period trappings, what about this period, and particularly queerness in this period, did you want to evoke within this sort of, you know, Americana sort of sweep that you give it?
Yeah, to me, the thing that appeals to me about this is it's a look at a different kind of Americana. It looks at it through this money housing development, through casinos and backroom card games and cruising parks and gay bars. You know, so it's like an Americana seen through a queer lens. That was really, that was really interesting to me. And we always tried to shy away from iconic or sort of like really recognizable things, like the atomic, when they go on a date and go watch the atomic, blast test. you know, that was in a bar, like in a lounge, in a bar, like a mid-century kind of thing, and instead we put it out in parking, you know, in a parking lot. The visual effects team, the first time that came back, it was like this huge, beautiful explosion. And I said, guys, we have to put it like 15 miles away, otherwise the whole second half of the film will be everyone melting. So that was why they ended up very small.
We have to wrap. I wanted to ask you about generally wrangling horses, so maybe I can combine that into another question, just about the ending and the kind of note you wanted to end the movie on.
Yeah, you know, the horses were, you know, Julius brings this horse to her. He thinks that they built a ranch in California, they live in a ranch house. You know, it's sort of a myth, but it's also a bit taunting, you know, and the idea that this horse is a bit of magical realism. I mean, Muriel gets to meet Henry, you know, they connect unknowingly that they're both looking for the same person. And this horse has just been wandering around this unfinished housing development for, you know, a couple of months and finds its way back to Julius. There's a bit of magic to it, and you know, it's actually the way the novel ends. And it's very, you know, it's very beautiful. And sadly, in the novel, when he goes back to the housing development, Sandra's house is gone. You know, it's sort of been, you know, emptied. You know, so